The global plant-based meat market hit $8 billion in 2023, and analysts project it will surpass $35 billion by 2034. But here is the part that almost nobody in the food industry wants to admit out loud. Despite those staggering numbers, plant-based meat sales have actually been declining in major grocery chains across the United States. So what is really going on inside this industry? In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover how plant-based meat went from a fringe health movement to a billion-dollar science experiment, why some of the world's smartest investors poured hundreds of millions into companies that are now struggling to survive, and the one uncomfortable truth about plant-based meat that even its biggest advocates quietly acknowledge. The answer involves biology, business strategy, and a fundamental misunderstanding of why people actually eat meat in the first place. To understand where plant-based meat is today, you need to go back much further than Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods. The concept of replacing animal protein with plant sources is ancient. Tofu has been a meat substitute in China for over 2,000 years. Seitan, made from wheat gluten, became a staple in Buddhist monasteries across Asia as far back as the 6th century. Tempeh emerged in Indonesia centuries ago as a fermented soybean product. These were not products trying to mimic meat. They were simply protein-dense foods integrated naturally into cultural diets. The modern plant-based movement in the West began gathering momentum in the 1970s when Francis Moore Lapp published Diet for a Small Planet, arguing that shifting away from animal agriculture could address global hunger and environmental damage. This was the philosophical foundation. But the technology to actually simulate meat texture, flavor, and appearance at scale did not exist yet. For decades, veggie burgers meant dense, crumbly patties that tasted like compressed vegetables and fell apart the moment they hit heat. That all changed in the early 2010s when a convergence of food science, venture capital, and climate anxiety created the conditions for something genuinely new. Ethan Brown founded Beyond Meat in 2009. Patrick Brown, no relation, founded Impossible Foods in 2011. Both companies had the same audacious goal: create a product so close to real meat that even committed carnivores could not tell the difference. Here's where the science becomes genuinely fascinating. Meat gets its characteristic taste and texture from three main components: fat distribution, protein structure, and a molecule called heme. Muscle tissue in animals contains myoglobin, an iron-containing protein that carries oxygen and is largely responsible for meat's distinctive bloody, savory, umami flavor. Impossible Foods zeroed in on heme as the key. Their breakthrough was discovering that, like hemoglobin, a similar molecule found in the roots of soy plants could replicate that flavor profile. They genetically engineer yeast to produce soy-like hemoglobin at scale, and that ingredient became the foundation of the Impossible Burger. Beyond Meat took a different approach, focusing entirely on plant-based ingredients without genetic engineering. Their product uses pea protein isolate as the primary structural component, combined with coconut oil and cocoa butter to simulate fat marbling, and beet juice extract to create the visual appearance of blood. The texture is achieved through a process called extrusion, where plant proteins are heated and pressurized through a machine that aligns the protein fibers in a way that mimics the chewy, layered structure of muscle tissue. Both products launched to extraordinary media attention. The Impossible Burger debuted at a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York in 2016. Beyond Meat went public on the Nasdaq in May 2019, and its stock surged 163% on the first day of trading, making it the best-performing IPO in nearly 2 decades. Investors were convinced they were watching the beginning of the end for traditional meat. But here is what nobody talks about when people celebrate those early victories. The overwhelming majority of people buying plant-based burgers in 2019 were not meat eaters switching over. They were existing vegetarians and flexitarians who were already minimizing meat consumption. The core promise of the technology, converting dedicated carnivores, was not being fulfilled at anywhere near the projected scale. The financial reality became clear fast. Beyond Meat's stock, which once traded above $200 per share, collapsed below $10 by 2023. The company reported revenue declines for multiple consecutive quarters. Impossible Foods laid off hundreds of employees. Grocery store data from Nielsen and Spins showed that plant-based meat retail sales fell by nearly 13% in 2023 compared to the prior year. The category that was supposed to revolutionize how humanity eats was contracting. Why? The answer involves three compounding problems that the companies and their investors underestimated dramatically. First, price. At peak retail, an Impossible Burger patty cost roughly twice as much as a comparable beef patty. In an inflationary environment, that premium became impossible to justify for average shoppers, especially when the product was not already deeply embedded in their weekly routine. Second, and this is critical, nutrition. Both products were marketed with a strong health halo. But independent nutritional analysis complicated that narrative significantly. A Beyond Burger patty contains around 250 calories, 18 grams of fat, and 390 milligrams of sodium per serving. A lean beef patty of similar weight contains fewer calories, comparable protein, and significantly less sodium. When health-conscious consumers started reading labels carefully, the appeal weakened considerably. Third, and most fundamentally, sensory authenticity. Food scientists will tell you that replicating meat flavor is extraordinarily difficult because meat does not taste like one thing. It tastes like hundreds of volatile compounds produced through the Maillard reaction, fat rendering, and tissue breakdown during cooking. Plant proteins produce different volatile compounds at high heat. Experienced cooks noticed the difference. Regular consumers noticed the difference. And in a product category where the entire value proposition rests on indistinguishability from the real thing, that gap matters enormously. So where does the actual science stand today, and where is the industry heading? Precision fermentation is emerging as the next frontier. This technology uses microorganisms to produce specific animal proteins directly, without the animal. Companies like Perfect Day are using fermentation to create whey protein identical at a molecular level to dairy whey. The resulting products avoid many of the sensory shortcomings of first-generation plant-based products because they use actual animal proteins, just produced without livestock. Cultivated meat, also called lab-grown or cell-cultured meat, represents an even more radical approach. Companies like Upside Foods and Good Meat grow real animal muscle cells in bioreactors, producing genuine meat tissue without slaughter. The FDA and USDA granted regulatory approval for cultivated chicken in the United States in 2023, a historic milestone. But the production costs remain prohibitive. Current estimates suggest cultivated meat costs between $10 and $50 per pound to produce at today's scale, making commercial viability a long-term project rather than an imminent reality. The business landscape is now bifurcating. Companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat are fighting for survival in a saturated retail market while simultaneously trying to maintain food service partnerships with chains like Burger King and McDonald's. Meanwhile, a new wave of startups focused on whole-cut products, think plant-based chicken breasts and pork chops rather than ground meat analogs, are attracting fresh venture interest. The ground meat category is crowded. Whole cuts represent a genuinely unsolved technical challenge where first-mover advantage still exists. The environmental argument for plant-based meat remains the industry's strongest card. Research published in Science found that producing a beef burger generates approximately 49 to 100 times more greenhouse gas emissions than producing a comparable Beyond Burger. Land use and water consumption data show similar disparities. As climate regulation tightens globally and carbon pricing becomes more prevalent, the cost advantage of conventional meat production may erode significantly over the next 2 decades, potentially reshaping the competitive landscape in ways that current retail sales figures do not predict. What this industry's turbulent first decade actually demonstrates is that changing human food behavior is one of the hardest problems in commerce. People eat for pleasure, identity, tradition, and culture, not just nutrition and environmental impact. Any technology or company that assumes otherwise will eventually confront that reality in their revenue figures. The science of plant-based meat is genuinely impressive. The business of plant-based meat is genuinely complicated. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Flavor Vault for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.